Hi, this is Class Creatives, and in this lecture we're going to kind of talk about how to create and animate in time some Arcane style graphic visual effects inside of Maya with some animations. So here we have a animation, just a single secondary and third hit on the attack, and we're going to just kind of start roughing in some timing of some kind of 2D effects that can kind of give a little more life to the animation. So I'm just going to drag in this example that I have here of some speed lines that kind of just that you can kind of animate. So in here there's some channel properties on what you can do to kind of animate these lines moving. And they're kind of going in the wrong direction. So what I'm going to do is just rotate these lines about 180 degrees. And then you're going to be able to animate these speed lines like this. And I'm just middle mousing, dragging that. And then I can scale this as I see fit. I can always change that later. But let's take a look at what we can do for this animation. And what we're going to want to really have, I think, in this one is I want to put these speed lines kind of around this area here when he's making this swing around the 114 or 1014 mark around here. So I'm just going to translate these lines out to roughly kind of where I kind of want these speed lines to go. Now keep in mind, you're going to want to animate these based on the camera. If it's a game, you're going to want to kind of keep that in mind where your game camera is going to be, or your cinematic camera, whatever that might be. You might be doing a cinematic, you might be doing a little bit like a short or something like that, and you're going to want to animate these speed lines based on what looks good for the camera. This particular animation was done for a game that's in our masterclass course, so if you haven't heard of that, you may want to check that out. It's our indie flagship game development course, and in that course we're covering kind of how to create a game from scratch, and these animations are featured, and I kind of show how I come up with these animations and put these animations together in that course. But for this particular lecture, I'm going to show you kind of how to animate a 2D type of graphic set of polygons like this to kind of give this 2D effect from this profile view. So around 115 or 1014, 1015, I'm going to animate these lines out. I'm going to set a key, and around 1012 or so is about when I want that kind of effect to kind of start. And since it's a side angle, we may not really need to, we could kind of fake a little bit of how this gets animated. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually turn the visibility off, and then I'm going to have it go on, and then I'm also going to animate these speed lines as well to the maximum. So what you're going to get are these speed lines kind of animating out. And of course, if we drag these keys out a little bit more, they'll kind of dissipate a little bit slower as they disappear. So right now it might look like they're kind of like it's a force that's being translated out. So you might want to actually kind of keep them a little more contained where the weapon is. To kind of give an effect that there's motion, that there are more motion lines than they are a power effect that's happening. So you might even want to trail the lines a little bit more towards the back end of the weapon, and maybe even translate it here just to give some of that force to make it look like that weapon is actually traveling in space. So you can kind of play around with that timing, play around with where those lines are taking place. You can frame by frame these. You can kind of scale them out, kind of see what looks good to you in terms of timing, and you can play around with that effect and kind of get that in place to look good for just not even just This might be the actual final effect, or you might even give this rough in to a visual effects artist and have him kind of use this as a rough timing to kind of just rough this in for gameplay or something like that, or for a cinematic, and you can have your visual effects guy kind of put that together to you know, get an effect in there that might even be a little more polished than something that we rough in here as an example. So for the second one, I'm going to use the hit impact explosion effect, and this one is an interesting one that I think we can utilize to put for the third hit. So for the third hit, we kind of has this over the head finale, and I think that would be a good point of impact to kind of have this explosion effect sort of start to appear. So we can play around a little bit with the timing of how this explosion can kind of work, and depending on how large we want the impact to actually be. So we can see that it's starting a little bit too soon, so we can just kind of move that around, have that impact happen, and then kind of we can have it back contract, or it looks like just going all the way to that value of 1, kind of gives that impact there. And what we can do here is the visibility. It has a nice option to kind of remove that visibility there, and we can have it show up right on impact. And we can even lower this impact to be a little less large, and then it can kind of dissipate a little bit a few frames later. So now we kind of have those speed lines, a little bit of an impact on that third hit. And it kind of gives you an idea of, you know, some of that rough timing that you can use. And even when it's playing very quickly, you can see how much that already adds a little bit to the graphicness of the actual animation that's taking place. And do one more on the first one. On the first hit, you can put it around this area here. I'm going to use this spark effect. This one's pretty interesting here. This one also, I think we're going to need to kind of rotate it around. So if you look at this one, if you look at it from this angle, you can kind of see that it kind of sparks out this way. And this is a nice subtle effect that you can put into this first hit because it doesn't really have a lot of impact on there versus the other two. So that way you get a little bit of a buildup as you hit that animation on the 3-hit combo. So what we're going to do here is kind of put a little bit of that same timing and kind of give the animation some time to kind of spark its way out. And let's see if we do a different technique here and just kind of decide where we want it to appear, which would be around this 1004 mark frame. We can keep the visibility on, go ahead and key that, and then we just turn it off over here. And it's just like a more quicker way to just kind of dissipate that effect. If you wanted to kind of have those effects closer to the weapon, you can easily just adjust that timing in the graph editor and kind of just, we can just move it a little bit closer to where that weapon is making contact. And now you can kind of see you've got a little bit of that spark action happening on that first hit. Some action lines coming on the second one. And then that big impact on that third hit. So you can just continue to play around with the scale of things. You can kind of adjust how much impact you want it to have. It might be better for it to be a little bit more subtle versus something that's kind of in your face. Depends on what you're going for. But it's a good little way to kind of test to see what kind of a visual effects you want for your animations. And you can kind of give this a rough in with your visual effects artist. It just kind of shows some of that timing that you're looking for, and gives your animation a little bit more punch as well. So yeah, that's kind of just a little quick and dirty way to get some visual effects into your animations without really having to add a ton of extra effort and put those right into your Maya scene. You can get a nice little cinematic, and of course you can bring this into Unreal as a cinematic. You just need to make sure you have your joints and everything in place, just like you would animate any other type of mesh. And you know, you can kind of have that in your cinematic sequencer or whatever you might have, depending on what you're trying to do. Obviously, if you're going to be using this in gameplay, it's probably not going to be the way you want to actually do your visual effects, but it's a good way to rough something in to kind of give a visual storytelling element to your animations for whatever production processes you might have for pre-production or planning or blocking things out or trying to see the timing of your visual effects and the impact that that might work with, depending on the style that you're going for. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.